and welcome to Box Set Binge the Bible, the podcast from Seven Vineyard, where we are listening through the entire Bible in a year. My name is Bern, Leckie, joined by Owen, Lynch.
Hello, everyone.
This week we have been engaging with a book called Chronicles. It is an historical book. It has lots of details of stories that we've read before in other books and family trees that we've seen before in other books. What have you thought, Owen? Have you enjoyed going through this?
Yeah, I have. It's actually quite refreshing, actually. I quite like it. For me, it seems like this is stuff we've read before, in Samuel and Kings, but or listened to before. Actually, I might just say at this point, no, this week I actually read it rather than listened to it.
Was there a reason why you were reading rather than listening?
I sometimes find it easier to read, and there was a lot of lists in this. Where do you listen, Bern? How do you do it? Because sometimes it's a bit repetitive, isn't it?
I decided I wanted to listen to the whole thing, but I couldn't just put myself in the room and not do anything. Actually, I never do, to be honest.
No.
What do you do? What I do is I play Fall Guys, which is a video game where you run around and race other people and go through courses and bounce off obstacles, and it just gives my hands and a part of my brain something to do. But I find that it just happens to also put me in a zone where I can listen to other things and take in other things and have a think and a pray sometimes about what those other things are about. But I did find myself going from about 1.5 speed up to double speed when we were going through a list of names. It felt like the landscape.
Your secret's out.
It felt like I was on a train looking at the landscape at a very high speed.
On a high speed train.
Yes. Which meant perhaps I might have missed some of the details, at least on the first glance, but I got the big picture. Okay. And I think the big picture is important. But why does it look a bit different from some of the ways in which that picture's been painted in the past? Are we imagining that there are differences? It made me remember how I had been it seems really, really awkward even to confess that when I was a teenager, I received training in what to do when having a conversation with people about faith, because I went to a Christian union, at a school,
in your school,
at a school and at a university.
Really? You got trained in how to deal with...
Trained in how to share my faith. And
that sounds bizarre.
And the training, I don't know if they still do it, the training at the time was around sorts of things that people might say, including but isn't the Bible full of contradictions? How can you trust the Bible? There are loads of contradictions in the Bible. Do you know what training was to do?
No, go on. I'm intrigued.
It was to say to the person who asked you that, and now it makes a big difference how you say this. Okay, so first of all, I'll say it the way it feels in my head that I remember having to say. I don't think we were meant to say it like this, but if someone says the Bible's full of contradictions, you would say, "Oh, really? Name one." Which is a terrible way to say it, but you could say that really nicely. Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting. Have you got a particular one in mind? Much kinder way. But it's the same thing you're saying to people, which is basically just, I want to minimise myself from this issue. I'm actually coming from a place where I think the whole of the Bible should just all fit together, and we shouldn't be fussing about contradictions in the Bible. And actually, most people, they said in the training, can't name one. So you then go, oh, well, in that case, let's move on. But when people can name one, the training suggested, well, maybe you can answer if they've misunderstood. Or if you don't, then you say, that's a very good point. I will go and ask a leader about that, and we'll get back to you. Like the assumption was, they're saying this because they wanted rationally to have an argument with you and reconcile their understanding, and then you could sort it all out, and once you'd sorted it all out rationally, then they'd become a Christian. Do you know how many people I know who became Christians that way?
Probably zero.
Zero. Although I know plenty of people who've come around and we've had conversations about faith, and they've shared what's makes it difficult for them to believe in it, and what I found is that when you listen and go, oh yeah, that sounds really rough, and try to understand and walk through it a bit, and then not argue with them about it. Well, sometimes they go away and you never see them again, but sometimes quite a few people I can think of who've come back and we've grown in relationship, or maybe they've grown in relationship with someone else, a friend, someone else in the church, and they have eventually decided, actually, we want to walk with these people. These are, where you're going is good. Let's do that. And so I don't think it's anything to do with arguing about contradictions that changes people's minds, but this business of, are there contradictions in the Bible, makes me feel prickly because of that background. And I think, and I think because, and then looking at how Chronicles is different in some ways from other books in the Bible, makes me want to ask why, what's going on. So what have we noticed? What have you noticed?
Well, I mean, I just think it's fascinating, isn't it, that if there are contradictions in the Bible, that's a killer argument for your religion is nonsense, you know what I mean? Because of course it's not, because actually the Bible's actually full of contradictions, because it's not just one book written in one particular time, right?
Ah, right. Okay, that's a good insight. Yes.
It is, isn't it? And I think that scholars think, a little bit of nerdy stuff here, but scholars think that this was actually in the Hebrew Bible, and that's what we need to understand is that Jews have the same books as the Old Testament, but they have them in a different order. And Chronicles is the last book in the Hebrew Bible.
Okay.
And it's kind of like a highlights reel, probably written around about the time of either the end of the exile or after the exile. That is the exile of the Judaites and Benjamites to Babylon. And then they, if you remember, they came back from exile and they started to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Read Ezra and Nehemiah for that. And that's when this particular book is thought to have been written, at a time actually when the Judaites needed hope for a future. It looks to me like this was written by people who were part of the tribe of Judah or Benjamin, which, if you remember back, actually there was the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom was the 10 tribes, and then the southern kingdom was 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin. And the reason this, and I'm just going to give you a quick resume of my thoughts on this. Chapter 2, Judah is presented like as the first son of Israel, and it's his descendants that are listed first, although he's not the firstborn of Israel, as it actually says in chapter 5 that the firstborn rights were actually transferred from Reuben to the sons of Joseph, Benjamin and Manasseh. But Judah is described as the strongest brother of the 12, and of course David is descended from him. We read that in chapter 5. And also, interestingly, in chapter 9, Jerusalem appears to be the place where the descendants of Judah, Benjamin and Ephraim, one of Joseph's sons, settled, along with some Levites, because they always need some Levites to administer the temple. So even in those first 9 chapters of Chronicles, we're getting lots of evidence that this has actually been written by the people who settled in that area at that time, and principally from the tribe of Judah, Benjamin and some Levites as well. For me, that stood out in those first 9 chapters that we read.
That's interesting how that stood out, because that sounds like a lot of detail.
Yeah, I know. But for me, I think that's what came from reading it, which is quite interesting, because actually I was going, oh, I was kind of just drawing. I was actually using pen in my. Do you do that, pen? Do you write in your Bible? I write in my Bible. No. And I was underlining bits. I was going, oh, that's there, and oh, that's there, and oh, that's there. So yeah, literally, I just saw it as I was reading it. It just stood out. I mean, whoever wrote this was writing with great clarity. I mean, it's a wonderful summary of that time. But there are some interesting contradictions, which is what you were getting at, wasn't it?
Yes. I think my impression from the listening, I went back to look at details later, but my impression from the listening was firstly how, what a broad scope this family tree is. And because it starts with Adam and it moves through kind of therefore like the whole of humanity as they understand it, then it feels like an everyone family tree, except that there are clearly branches. There are clearly things that are concentrated on. So yes, it starts with everyone, but it gets important when you get to Abraham. And are all of Abraham's sons equally important? Well, no, because there's Isaac, who's kind of more important to this family tree than Ishmael. And then his son, Israel, is more important than his brother Esau. And why is that? Well, it's because this family tree has a shape. And the shape is, we're going to introduce you to Israel, and then we're going to introduce you. Israel is just another name for Jacob and sons. Israel's sons are essentially the tribes, which then become the clans and the people with the jobs and everyone in the social order of Israel as a nation. And it's so important, it seems, to describe Israel, but also quite important to describe the fact that there are other people who are not Israel. Right, so I think there's kind of two things going on. There's the thing of, let's introduce you to your family if you're Israel, and there are tons of names you can latch onto and stories that you'll remember. But also, let's remind you if you're Israel that there are others who are not. Right, so now you have a sense of who you are, and you have a sense of who you are not. And that's quite important in some ways for the identity of a people, especially the people who are feeling the crisis. And if this is written, like scholars think it is, at either during or at the end of the exile period, and they're trying to rebuild Israel, then it strikes me that has an obvious purpose then, to remind people of who they are, to remind people of who they're not, and to remind people of this sort of purpose that they want to draw people into, this vision that they want people to share. And so there's very much the scope for this to look different from other books because it's written with a very, very particular purpose. Now, the other thing that strikes me, once we get past the family tree hugeness at the beginning, once we get into the historical stories, is that it's familiar stories, but an unfamiliar edit. Did you notice the edit?
Yeah.
So we don't get a lot about how Saul was blessed and did great things and was chosen by God. We're just introduced to Saul right at this very weird point in his life where he's at his weakest and he's about to die, and it gets explained that he was rubbish, basically. Saul died because he was unfaithful to the Lord, didn't keep the word of the Lord, even consulted a medium for guidance, didn't inquire of the Lord. So the Lord put him to death.
They didn't have a particularly high opinion of him, did they? He's almost cancelled, isn't he?
He was part of the family then, yes, but he was cancelled. It was right, because he didn't trust the Lord.
Yeah.
Who did trust the Lord? David. Edit. And then the next thing that happens is that the whole of Israel comes to David and says, they all come together and say, we're your own flesh and blood. And that is literally from 2 Samuel chapter 5. That is exactly as it's written there. The only thing is that edit misses out quite a few chapters in which Israel was fighting amongst itself as to who the king ought to be. Because, kings, normally it's their sons who are kings, right? It should have been Saul's son who was king. That's not how it worked here. There's years and years of conflict that's described in 2 Samuel, but the writer of Chronicles doesn't want us to fussle about all that. No, the story they're telling is this is what God was doing, and so David. And then there's David. How does David look in this version compared with how he looks in the last versions that we've read?
Oh, well, let's be frank. He looks very good. Very good. This is a this is a very good edit of David's life. There's a few references to him not kind of doing things quite right.
Not so many.
By no means is it what we read about in Kings, no.
Tell me again what happened with Bathsheba?
Yeah, exactly. Those of you that remember, he committed adultery with Bathsheba, didn't he? And he had her husband killed in battle, and none of that is in this account. As
we noted, as we felt when we went through Samuel, it was like that's the pivotal moment. That's a defining thing.
Not in this
about David's story. Nope, doesn't exist here.
No, didn't happen.
The other thing I noticed as well is the big mistake that's drawn attention to is when he decided to do a census, and in counting everybody up. It's still a little bit mysterious why that was such a bad idea. I think scholars think that's because he was basically planning on taxing people and not relying on God anymore for keeping the country running. He wanted to do his own thing, do a census and take it from there. The way it's recorded in Samuel, though, this is a mea culpa for David.
Yeah.
It's like, I made a mistake here. Is that how it is in Chronicles? No, because what happens in Chronicles is that Satan gets involved.
Right.
Hold on, where's Satan come from all of a sudden?
Who's Satan?
Well, that's interestingly, we don't even know what Satan means in this context.
Well, I think it's put in to absolve David of responsibility for that decision.
Yes, absolutely. And it figures larger and larger, I think, in Jewish thinking, because they keep wrestling with this question, how do we get to the kingdom of God? What's getting in the way of us having the kingdom that was promised? What's getting in the way? Are we doing something wrong, or is there some other force that's opposing us? And from the stories they picked up from all the other cultures around them, telling of opposing forces, of evil opposing good, I think they just concluded, well, that's it. That's the situation we're in. You know, we're doing our best, but there's Satan. We've got to deal with Satan. And this might be one of the first credits that Satan gets in that respect. So David is being described differently. David is absolved of his responsibility. He's being airbrushed, if you like, in this version of history to look really good. Yeah. And that the problems aren't really his problems.
Again, the airbrushing is to be seen where it says in chapter 18 that David was chiefly concerned with justice and righteousness. And this sense that now we're out of exile, we need to get ourselves a king. We need another king like David.
Yeah. I think one of the things to remember about the exile is that the people of Israel were scattered across the ancient world. And so actually, even as there were attempts to bring back and reform the nation of Israel, there were different views on how this could happen or should happen. What we're probably looking at here is the views of the people who were very central to Jerusalem, had the stake in gathering people back around a gathered nation, a king. Maybe we could find someone like David. Yeah, it would be great. Yeah. And as we'll see next time, the thing that David passed on to his descendants to set up, the idea of the temple and temple worship, that seemed essential and a good way of gathering people up and reforming as a nation. But this was also being read, listened to by people across the diaspora, people who had been scattered into Alexandria and all across other places where God seemed to be doing amazing things with them too. The fact that the Old Testament got translated into Greek, that happened outside of Israel. It happened because they were outside of Israel, and it's because they did that we have really good extensive records of it today. And that was the version probably of the Old Testament that Jesus' followers knew. So God's doing all sorts of things in all sorts of places, but I think it's really interesting that the people who put the canon of Scripture together were very happy to include particular viewpoints that are different perhaps from other viewpoints. Now the danger, I think, for us comes in when we can't reconcile that. Like if we're trained there are no contradictions worth bothering about in the Bible, or if we try and sort of gloss over that, or worse still, we don't even look at the whole of the Bible, but we just grab a bit of the Bible and then go, that must be for us now. Are there dangers in that?
Yeah, I mean, these people who insist that that there can't be contradictions in the Bible, I wonder whether the reason why they're insisting that is because the way they view the Bible is as an authoritative source which can't be questioned. And you and I know that we've lived in the Christian tradition for a long, long time. We've come across people like that, right? For whom the Bible can't be questioned. It is the authority, and if we don't all submit to that authority, then we're all going to I think their concern is that we all kind of go off in our own different ways, having our own different opinions, which is, of course, for them would be like an anathema. That would be like the worst thing to do. But the reality is that that actually we find ourselves in a position where we go, no, actually we appreciate the Bible was written in different contexts, different times, with different purposes, and what might be contradictions might be contradictions, and that's okay.
It was very okay for Jewish people.
Right.
Jewish people in Jesus' time would be debating it all the time and say, Jesus would ask people the question, how do you read this?
Yeah.
In other words, there's more than one way perhaps to interpret a piece of scripture. And did Jesus say, well, this is the right way and the wrong way? Well, sometimes, but I think maybe what Jesus was looking at wasn't so much the absolute meaning of the text as much as the engagement of the person. It's how we engage, it's how we join in with this conversation that's been going on through Scripture for centuries before us. To me, I think Chronicles is a very clear set of evidence that it's okay to have in the Bible a partisan viewpoint. It's okay to show that God's people were also a people on the move. It was a movement of people, not a static thing. And so if we read into the Bible that God through history moves people, then I think we should expect him to move us, right?
Oh no, Bern. No. It all
No?
No. It stops with us. We've got it right, and nothing else. Anyone that disagrees with us from now on, they're the ones that are wrong. They're the liberals.
I've literally heard it taught that it did stop sometime in the 1st century. And that's when the taps turned off.
I think every generation has fallen foul of this, haven't they?
If we're part of a movement, then I think that's really exciting. I think the scary thing about it is it means we'll still have questions, and it means we'll still be learning. But I think the encouraging thing about it is that we are actually part of that big family tree. We're part of the family. We're part of the family tree that might have been written to warn the Israelites. Here are your enemies. Yeah. Here's a list of your enemies. But we're part of the family tree that God has included. That Jesus went out of his way to teach that we are neighbours, and went out of his way to show that we are absolutely part of God's purposes and what God wants to do, and in a loving and inclusive way, and that we've got to learn more about loving and including if we're going to be part of that movement and growing along with the other disciples.
I love that phrase and that metaphor of movement, Bern, because I think that what it also enables us to recognise is use another metaphor of a snapshot. And for many people, the Bible is an authority book, and we probably need to talk more about that at another point, and why we need to. Well, I think we've already done some justice to that argument, but I would say that there are some people that will go to the Bible, and probably me included, and you'll be looking for something just to inspire you, just something that catches your eye, and you go, "Oh, that really speaks to me in my current situation." And I think that Christian songwriters and Christian poets and authors are very good at having a snapshot of something that they read in the Bible, and then creating a song around it, or creating a poem or a story around it, or a principle around it. And there's a really good example in 1 Chronicles chapter 4 with this character called Jabez. Now, I've read Christian books, or I've seen Christian books on the prayer of Jabez, and they've created these beautiful books about this prayer of Jabez, and I'm like, what is this prayer of Jabez? And basically it's this person who, it says, was in 1 Chronicles 4, it says that he honoured God, and he prayed that God would bless him, enlarge his territory, and keep him from harm and keep him from pain. And I'm like, well, that's isn't that a prayer that we'd all want to pray for ourselves, right? But in a sense, what is sometimes a snapshot where you go, "Oh, that really means something to me," has been turned into a book or a song, and then it becomes a doctrine, and then it becomes fixed in time rather than being a kind of snapshot. And then consequently, you kind of get people going, "Oh yeah, no. So if I honour God, then God will bless me. That God will enlarge my territory, which might mean give me more money. God will keep me from pain, so I don't have any pain, and I won't be harmed in any way, shape, or form." And then I don't know about you, but when in my life, like, even if I had prayed the prayer of Jabez, I certainly can't say that's been my experience. I have experienced pain, I have experienced loss. It doesn't. 1 + 1 doesn't equal 3 in this situation. It's kind of like.
But you want it to.
Of course you
want it to. If you're in pain.
Exactly right. And that's why the snapshot is so important. It's so important to honour that snapshot as God speaking through in that moment, but to make a doctrine out of it, or even, may I add, a song out of it, or a book, I think probably is unwise.
Well, I mean, I think I get the value of inspiration.
I do.
And the ongoing value of remembering that there was this one time with this one person, this one thing happened to them, and that can inspire me. I think that the only difficulty comes then when you turn that, as you say, into a doctrine. Yeah. And say, right, in order to get what they got, we have to do what they did.
That's right.
And the difficulty with that approach for us is that our world's just different.
Right.
We're in a different time and a different place. If I was to tell myself, right, the answer to all our problems is to do what these people in Israel were doing at the time. Okay, so what were they doing? They were reforming their nation. Okay, that sounds good. They were gathering people up that were like them. And they were excluding the people who were not like them. And they were saying, and this is the way to fix our problems, by the way, because we are God's special chosen people. I'd like to think that we are God's special chosen people. Is that what God's saying to us in Britain today? Is it though? No, that's what God was saying to Israel at this time. And yet there will be people who pick that up and say, oh, this is us today. There are people in America who pick this up and say, this is us today. And so we should, America first, exclude the other people. This is coming from this place of saying we can copy paste their situation and their vision and as our own, as if God is speaking this to us right now. That's so toxic and so wrong. It's just wrong. It wasn't written to you. It wasn't written for that purpose. The scary thing is that it is a harder thing then to say, okay, well, what's God saying to us today? How do we know? How do we engage with God today? It is harder than just picking up a book and go, well, he was saying that to them then, so he must be saying it to me now. It's harder than that. But do you know how we do work our way through it, because I think Jesus has given us loads to be able to tell the difference between what God's doing and what God's not doing. He talked about us being fruit in a vine. When we're connected with him, we will be producing things naturally in our lives that are the sort of things that God wants us to grow. And Paul wrote a load about that. Those things he called the fruit of the Spirit, like love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness. And for me, that's one way I listen to when a teacher who says they're teaching from God is saying, yeah, this is where I'm coming from. It's like, well, okay, so is what you're sharing primarily about love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and all those good things? Or does it sound like it's more driven by fear? Which other New Testament writers said was the opposite of love. It's the enemy of love. If you're driven by fear, then no. If you're driven by hatred and exclusion, if you're driven by actually physically wanting to identify the people who are not your neighbours and hate them and tell yourself we'll only do well when we've excluded them, well, no, I think you've not got the gospel there. That's not the kingdom, as far as I understand it, from having taken this story a bit further. But do you know what? I don't want to argue with anyone about that because I don't think anyone believes this from arguing about it. I think people believe it when they walk with other people who are walking and moving, the way God's moving us together, which I do see happening.
I agree. And, I think there's another angle on this, which I would talk about in terms of the way in which our songwriters, Christian songwriters, will take scriptures like this. I'm thinking of chapter 16 here, which is rich pickings. It's where David appoints Asaph and his associates to give praise to the Lord. And it says in this manner, and then it goes off and creates loads of wonderful poetry, I might add, wonderful poetry, but which of course I recognise from many evangelical Christian songs that we sing in church. Declare his glory amongst the nations, his marvellous deeds among the peoples. For great is the Lord and most worthy of praise, for he is to be feared above all gods. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due to his name. Now, let the heavens, and then my favourite one is, let the trees of the forest sing, let them sing for joy before the Lord, for he comes to judge the earth. Another one, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, his love endures forever. We've heard these lyrics in songs, haven't we?
Yeah, they're inspirational though, aren't they? I mean, that's nice.
Inspirational poetry, absolutely. And I think one of the incredible thing about worship songs is they are of the heart, aren't they? Certainly in the sort of charismatic evangelical tradition, they're of the heart. But I do wonder sometimes if the words that relate to David's leadership of this nation and the dominance of Israel and Judah, the power that God has given them, the glory of God and reflected in the glory of Israel, these sorts of songs, sometimes I wonder whether we're a little bit not questioning enough some of the lyrics of the songs that we sing. Does that make sense? Don't get me wrong, that's not true for all Christian lyrics at all. But I think sometimes when songwriters just lift lyrics from the Bible, particularly around the sort of nationalistic kind of fervor that we see in even in that declare his glory amongst the nations, his marvelous deeds amongst all the peoples, for great is the Lord and most worthy of praise, to be feared above all gods. There's nothing wrong with that. It's nothing you're not going to disagree with there. But the way in which the kind of the language of, if you like, I'm carefully saying this, but nationalism, we see that reflected in some of our worship songs. I'm just asking the question. I think is that helpful? It's is it an invitation almost to have a more of a kind of critical ear to what we're actually singing? Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And I think in times of my life when I've been really critical of what's happening in worship, have often just happened to coincide with times in my life when I think my relationship with God hasn't been as trusting as maybe it could be, and where my heart hasn't been as loving maybe as it could be personally. Now, this is not an accusation on you or anyone else. I'm just recognizing. I think I've been in situations where, say, a mass, like I used to go to Catholic church, a mass isn't different from week to week, but some weeks it feels full of life, and some weeks it feels dead. And that's not a reflection on the mass content, because it didn't change. It's a reflection on me. That my experience of growing up with that has really encouraged me to be reflective, really, when I'm feeling that about worship songs, and I think that the important thing for me is to kind of wonder, really, where is worship coming from? Where's my feeling coming from? Where's my decision coming from to worship God? Or am I hoping that I'll just be taught through the worship? Worship songs, to my mind, are not very good teachers of theology.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that.
They're not really intended to be teachers
they're not
of
meant
theology.
to be, no.
Even the ones with lots of words, maybe especially the ones with lots of words, are not very good teachers of theology. They're often they're good reflections of how someone who was worshipping was putting their worship into words. That's great, but who are the good teachers of theology? Well, Holy Spirit, and engagement with the whole of what's going on in the Bible, which is why it's nice to listen through at a pace sometimes, so you get that big picture.
I really appreciate you saying that, because I think one of the things that we have going on, particularly in charismatic evangelical churches, is a preponderance of worship songs over and above every other form of creative expression of worship. Obviously, let's just put it as a baseline that we think worship is any way in which we can honor God with our lives. So it could be our work, our play, whatever. But particularly in churches where the principal means by which we express words of praise, adoration, and worship is through songs, as opposed to say, as opposed to say dance or liturgy or prophetic art. Call it what you like. Where that happens, actually, a lot of our theology does come through songs, and partly for two reasons. One is because we sing so much, and we often sing the same songs repeatedly. And two, the refrains are often repetitive, and so actually our theology in some ways becomes embedded within our psyche by the virtue of the use of song. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think what a song can do, though, better than teaching us what to believe, a song is good at reflecting what we already believe and amplifying it, hooking onto something that we want to hear in the song, and then we can sing it with gusto. I'm just outside of a church setting. I'm thinking of a song that's often misremembered or misused, or just like it seems strange when people want to play it in outside of its original context. Is "Every Breath You Take" by the Police, because so when that gets played at a wedding, it's just odd. The people want to hear it in the context of, this is a nice song about someone who really loves someone.
Yeah.
It's actually a song about stalking. If you look at the
lyrics,
it really? It's an obsessive stalker song.
Gosh.
It's horrible.
Oh,
and
my life.
you don't,
I've never listened to that like that before, but that's true.
Right. Well, there we go. So people will read it differently. How do you read it?
Yeah.
If you read it as obsessive stalker song and then hear it as a wedding, you're going to go, what the heck's going on here?
Yeah.
But as you say, lots of people have just heard it as, oh, this is a nice love song. Well, imagine having that. So this is a song that was, decades old. Can you imagine that we have disagreements about what songs mean that are centuries old?
Right.
Yeah, of course we do.
Yeah.
And it's not so important the content of the song as much as how we've chosen to engage with it. What is it that it's igniting in us? What is it that we've grabbed onto that we then quote from the song, or the song sort of reminds us of? There's a ton of stuff.
That's a really good point, Bern, because I think that, just going back to that movement versus snapshot thing, that the creator of that song will have created that song in a snapshot, but equally we engage with that song in a snapshot as well, where we're at that moment in which we're singing it, right? And I think that, and therein lies the way I deal with worship songs, where I'm kind of like, oh, the theology in this song is just not, it's not helping me express my heart to God. Actually, I'm actually in a position to be able to choose how to respond to that, and recognizing that might have value for someone stood next to me singing, or someone kind of humming it as they listen to it in their ears as they walk down the road. Even if it isn't a value to me, it may well be a value to them, because there's a dynamism. There's a dynamism in the moment, which is the dynamic between you and the Holy Spirit, right? So there's a very strong dynamic there. But that doesn't excuse the reality that we do sometimes get our theology from our songs, and some of that theology has been taken out of context. It's no longer a snapshot, but it's being seen as a doctrine.
I think if we were to just be a song church, if that was all we did, but I've never met a church that was just a song church. I've been to Hillsong. No, I mean, Hillsong, is most famous around the world for its songs, right? My wife and I, we went along quite a few times, actually. We've been to the middle of Sydney one, we've been to the big one there, and we're struck by the depth of what happens in a church like that. There are songs that they're famous for, but there's also a community. And actually, it's the community that makes the biggest impression. It's the community, and actually the quality of their welcome is awesome, and something we felt once we'd experienced, we wanted to sort of grab some lessons from and try and be even half that good when we got home. That was the way that we saw people growing together, the way that we saw that relationships were developing, where people went from, I'm living in a city and I don't know who to trust and I don't know what's going on, to I found some people here that I can really connect with and really share life with. That's brilliant. That's the stuff of really good church, I think. And so whether the church is famous for its teaching or famous for its songs or whatever, I think the churches that God breathes life through actually end up they're quite good at a lot of things. But sometimes it's the worship or something that stands out as particularly good or particularly icky, depending on what we're expecting, right?
Yeah, it does. Well, we've got a lot out of this 21 chapters of Chronicles, haven't we?
We have. I feel we've gone on a journey here as well. The journey will continue into worship as we carry on into the next section, because we're going to look at the temple and how the story of the temple is retold here. It's going to remind us that worship was central to the idea of who Israel has believed itself to be. And we're going to look at how that was expressed then and see what we can learn from it now. Let's listen to that and come back next week.
We'll look forward to seeing you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.